A blind ex-cop sits quietly at a cafe, with his loyal German shepherd unaware that danger is about to return from his past. When a reckless biker decides to humiliate his dog, he triggers something far darker than he imagined, a chain of events that exposes a crime buried for years. This is the story of loyalty justice and a bond that sees beyond sight. If you believe dogs can sense what humans can't hit, like subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. The morning sun over Fairgrove, a quiet suburb outside Denver, came with that crisp October chill that made the air feel clean enough to drink. The hum of a lawnmower somewhere in the distance, the whistle of a delivery truck turning the corner, the faint smell of roasted beans drifting from the cafe down the street. It was all familiar music to David Ross. He couldn't see any of it anymore, but he could feel it, every rhythm, every warmth, every quiet tremor of the town that had learned to move on, even when he hadn't. Sitting on the porch of his small, white house, David leaned forward, slightly elbows on his knees, coffee cup in hand. His fingers traced the ceramic rim out of habit, the same way they once traced the outline of his service badge. Next to him sat Rex, a large, sable German shepherd, with intelligent amber eyes and a chest that seemed to rise and fall in perfect sync with David's breathing. The dog's ears twitched at every sound. The rustle of leaves, a car door slamming, a child laughing down the street, but his body stayed calm, grounded steady. "You smell that, buddy?" David murmured. His voice carried that soft rasp of someone who'd once given orders with confidence, but now spoke mostly to fill the silence. Rex's tail thumped once, twice against the porch. "Yeah." David smiled faintly. "That's the smell of caffeine in bad decisions. Let's go get one." He stood slipping the black harness over Rex's back, fingers finding the buckles with the muscle memory of a man who'd done this hundreds of times. He didn't need sight to do it perfectly. The harness clicked, the leash coiled around his wrist, and just like that they became one body again, man and dog stride and sound, trust, and instinct. The walk to the cafe was short, just 3 blocks, but every step held an intimacy David couldn't explain. He could tell when they passed the pharmacy by the faint whiff of rubbing alcohol. He knew they were crossing Maple Avenue when Rex paused exactly 2 feet before the curb, like a soldier awaiting command. "Forward," David said, and they moved. The cafe door chimed as they entered, and the warmth of roasted coffee wrapped around him like an embrace. Morning Officer Ross called a familiar voice. "Cappuccino, as usual, you know me too well," Gina David replied with a grin. "And stop calling me officer. I've been retired 3 years. "Sure," she teased, "but Rex still looks like he's on duty." Rex gave a quiet huff, as if in agreement. People often thought of him as just a guide dog, but there was something in the way he moved, disciplined, deliberate, that told another story. Some of the regulars even joked that Rex looked more alert than the cops patrolling downtown. David found his usual corner near the window, though the window meant nothing to him now. He sat resting the cane against the table, and Rex lay at his feet, his body forming a shield between David and the world. The sounds of clinking mugs, laughter, and low conversation swelled around them. David liked mornings like this, quiet but alive, ordinary but whole. Yet beneath the calm, something always hummed just out of reach. A memory, a flash, the sound of metal collapsing, the smell of smoke and blood. "You thinking about it again?" Gina asked softly as she set the cup in front of him. "The accident, not today." David lied, but even as he said it, his hand brushed against the faint scar near his temple, a reminder of the explosion that had taken his sight. "He saved my life, you know," David said suddenly, his voice low. Gina looked down at Rex, puzzled. "Rex did, yeah?" David nodded. "Same blast that got me. He was my K9 back then. Took most of the shrapnel before I did. They said he wouldn't make it, but he did. Guess we both did." His hand dropped to the dog's head, fingers tracing the rough fur between his ears. Rex pressed closer, eyes glimmering with something almost human. "So what happened to the guys who did it?" Gina asked quietly. David hesitated. The sounds of the cafe seemed to fade, leaving only the faint hum of the refrigerator behind the counter. "They said they found nothing." He murmured. "Case went cold. I stopped asking questions. He forced a smile. Some doors aren't meant to be opened twice. Gina didn't press. She'd seen that look before, the haunted calm of a man who had made peace with chaos, or at least tried to. Outside, the morning light shifted and a motorcycle roared down the street, its echo bouncing off the glass. Rex's ears flicked up, muscles tightening. David noticed the change immediately. "It's okay, boy," he whispered, "just noise." But Rex didn't relax. His gaze stayed fixed on the window, and a low growl rippled in his throat, quiet, restrained but unmistakable. David reached for his leash, sensing something he couldn't see. "What is it?" he asked under his breath. The growl faded, replaced by silence. Rex's eyes softened again, but they didn't lose their edge. The air around them seemed to shift, almost imperceptibly. Somewhere beyond the cafe, glass, fate had already begun to move. Neither of them could see it yet, but the past, the one David had buried and the one Rex had never forgotten, was coming back around. It was only a matter of time. The cafe door opened again with a sharp chime, letting in a gust of air that carried the smell of gasoline and cigarette smoke. The sound of heavy boots followed, scraping against the tiled floor. David tilted his head slightly toward the entrance, instinctively sensing the shift in atmosphere. Rex, lying at his feet, lifted his head and nostrils flaring as his body tensed ever so slightly. 3 men entered, voices loud, laughter, coarse jackets squeaking with the sound of wet leather. They moved as one, like a small storm, invading a quiet sky. The leader, Evan, had the kind of swagger that announced trouble long before his words did. His voice cut through the cafe's calm like a blunt knife. "Look at this place, man," he said to his friends. "Didn't know they served decaf with a side of therapy." His buddies laughed. Evan's boots echoed as he walked past tables, eyeing customers with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. He was in his early 30s, tall, muscular, his face marked by a thin scar that ran from his jaw to the corner of his lip, a souvenir from one of his too many bar fights. When his gaze landed on David and Rex, he paused. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. "That's one serious-looking dog you got there." His tone carried mock curiosity, but his eyes glinted with something else, recognition maybe. David turned his head slightly toward the sound. "Morning," he said simply, polite, controlled. "Yeah, morning," Evan replied, stepping closer. The air shifted again. Rex straightened, not threatening but alert. The subtle change didn't escape Evan's attention. "What's his name?" Evan asked. "Rex," David replied. "He's my guide." Evan smirked. "Guide dog, huh? Looks a little too disciplined for that." He leaned closer, ignoring the disapproving glance from the barista. "You sure he's not military, or maybe a cop's dog?" The question was casual, but the undertone was sharp. David smiled faintly. "He used to be," he said. "Now he's just my eyes." "Used to be," Evan repeated almost to himself, as if tasting the words. His gaze dropped to Rex's stance, the rigid posture, the controlled breathing, the quiet restraint. Evan knew that look. He'd seen dogs like this before during his short stint in county jail 3 years ago, when a K-9 unit had taken him down after he resisted arrest during a domestic assault call. He'd spent 6 months behind bars, and every time he heard the bark of a German shepherd, something in him flinched. The memory made his smirk tighten. He looked back at Rex, and a spark of old resentment lit behind his eyes. "You know," he said loud enough for others to hear, "I never liked these dogs. Too damn cocky." His friends laughed on cue. Rex didn't move, but his eyes tracked Evan's every motion, muscles coiled in silent readiness. The cafe's warmth turned uneasy, as if the walls themselves sensed tension. David, unaware of the looks passing between the men, reached down and gently brushed Rex's head. "Easy, boy," he murmured. Evan leaned closer, close enough for Rex to catch the bitter scent of tobacco and whiskey. "Relax, man," Evan said with mock friendliness. "We're just admiring your pet." "He's not a pet," David replied softly but firmly. Evan chuckled. "Oh, right. He's your partner. Sure thing, officer." The word hung in the air like a blade. A couple of heads turned. David stiffened slightly. Few people in town knew he had once been a cop. Evan's smirk widened. Thought I recognized you, he said. David Ross. You used to work downtown, didn't you? Narcotics unit. David's grip on his coffee cup tightened, but his voice stayed even. You have a good memory. Yeah, Evan said, leaning back, eyes narrowing. You were one of the guys who busted my buddy. Maybe me too, can't remember. Guess it's a small world. Guess it is, David said quietly. Rex's low growl rumbled under the table, almost inaudible, but sharp enough to make Evan glance down. For a brief second, their eyes met, man and dog, and something primal passed between them. Recognition. Challenge. Evan's smirk faltered for a heartbeat, then returned. Hey, easy there, he said, raising both hands. Just kidding? His tone was light, but his pride had been bruised. The idea that a blind man and his dog could unsettle him in public stung more than he expected. His friends were watching. He couldn't back down. You sure he's trained not to bite? He joked. He looks like he's ready to tear someone up. He's trained to protect, David replied simply. But he doesn't start fights. Well, Evan said maybe he should learn some manners. He made a sudden motion toward the table. Nothing serious, just a small gesture meant to test the dog. Rex didn't lunge. He didn't bark. He simply shifted his weight muscles, tightening like wire, and released a low, deliberate growl that vibrated through the floor. The sound froze the air around them. Conversations died. Cups paused mid-air. Evan's friends went quiet, exchanging uncertain glances. Whoa, relax, Evan said with a nervous laugh. I'm just playing. But his face betrayed something darker. The growl had triggered a buried fear, one he hadn't expected to feel again. He doesn't play, David said. His tone was calm, but firm enough to draw a few looks of respect from nearby tables. You should leave him be. Evan's jaw flexed. He wasn't used to being told what to do, least of all by someone who couldn't even see him. He stepped back, forcing a laugh, and turned to his friends. Come on, guys, let's grab a seat. Didn't mean to scare the poor pup. But as he walked away, his eyes lingered on Rex, analyzing every subtle movement. That stance, that composure, it wasn't just a guide dog's discipline. It was a soldier's restraint. Damn dogs trained, he muttered to himself, like a cop's. The thought festered. The humiliation burned. The cafe slowly returned to its rhythm, but the shift in the air didn't fade. Gina shot David a worried glance from behind the counter, mouthing, "You okay?" He nodded once, though his expression was unreadable. Rex, however, never took his eyes off Evan's table. He could sense something coming, something that had the scent of danger, the pulse of an old enemy returning in a new shape. The cafe, once a quiet pocket of warmth, had grown thick with tension. Conversations had turned into whispers. Spoons paused halfway to lips, and the air vibrated with the kind of silence that follows a threat not yet spoken. Evan sat 2 tables away now, pretending to joke with his friends, but his laughter came too loud, too sharp, like a blade scraping glass. Every now and then his gaze flicked toward David and Rex, burning with something meaner than amusement. David could sense it not through sight, but through the stillness in Rex's body, the way the dog's breathing had shifted from calm to measured vigilance. He set his cup down, fingertips brushing the rim again, a small ritual he used to center himself. "You still on alert, buddy?" he murmured. Rex's ears flicked muscles rigid. "It's okay," David said, though his voice lacked conviction. The cafe's background hum started again, but the piece was fragile, stretched thin like paper in rain. Evan leaned back in his chair, spinning a spoon between his fingers. "You know," he said loudly, "I think I've seen that dog before." His friends chuckled uncertainly. "Nah, man, leave it," one muttered, but Evan ignored him. "That's a cop's dog," he said, his eyes fixed on Rex. "They train them to look all calm before they bite your arm off. My buddy had scars to prove it." His voice carried through the cafe like a dare. David's shoulders tightened. He'd dealt with men like Evan before, angry, restless, looking for a fight they could justify later. "You should stop," David said quietly. The simplicity of the words only made Evan grin wider, or what he asked, standing up. His boots hit the tile hard, each step deliberate, as he approached the table. Rex rose instantly, body low, eyes locked. The growl came not loud but deep and resonant, vibrating in the air between them. Conversations froze again. Evan halted mid-step, startled by the sheer authority in that sound. "Easy there, Cujo," he said, laughing nervously. "Don't want to scare the customers?" "Back up," David said firmly, his hand on the leash but his voice calm. "He's warning you." "Oh, I bet he is," Evan sneered, leaning closer. "Tell me, officer, does he still take orders to attack? That word again, officer." It wasn't curiosity this time. It was venom. "You should walk away," David said evenly. "You don't want to do this." Evan's smile faded. His pride, already bruised, couldn't stand the quiet authority in David's tone. "You think I'm scared of a blind man and his mutt," he said, and before anyone could react, he kicked the leg of David's chair just hard enough to jolt it. The sound cracked through the cafe. Rex reacted instantly, stepping between them, his body rigid as a steel spring, lips curling to reveal the edge of his teeth. He didn't lunge. He didn't need to. The message was clear. The crowd gasped. Someone's phone clattered to the ground. "Hey," a woman's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and commanding. "Back off," Evan turned. The voice belonged to a woman at a nearby table, mid-30s, blonde hair tied back her coat, still half on, as if she'd been about to leave before things escalated. "Lady, mind your business," Evan snapped. "This is my business," she said, stepping closer. "You're harassing a man and provoking a service dog." There was something in her tone, steady trained, that made a few people look at her differently. Claire Donovan had spent 8 years as a K-9 unit coordinator before switching to a civilian desk job after an injury. She knew the signs of a dog reaching threshold. Rex's breathing was shallow, his stance too, forward, his tail low but tense. One wrong move and instinct could take over. "Sir," she said, turning to David, her voice softer, "you need to pull him back. Slowly, keep your voice calm." David nodded, his grip tightening on the leash. "Rex, heel," he murmured. The dog obeyed instantly, but kept his eyes locked on Evan. "You heard the lady," David said. "Walk away." "Or what?" Evan repeated, smirking again, though his voice shook slightly now. "You gonna call the cops on me if I have to?" Claire said, pulling out her phone. "Oh, that's rich," Evan scoffed. "A blind ex-cop and a wannabe hero calling 911 because someone looked at their dog funny." He gestured toward the crowd. "You people really that soft?" No one laughed this time. The tension in the room had shifted. Where there had been discomfort now, there was disapproval, an invisible line forming between Evan and everyone else. He felt it, and it only made him angrier. "Go ahead," he taunted. "Call them. I'll wait." Claire was already speaking quietly to dispatch, giving the address. Evan leaned closer to David's table, voice dropping low. "You think this dog makes you untouchable, don't you? Let's see what happens when it's not around." "Step back," David said again, firm, unshaken. Evan opened his mouth to retort, but something else caught his eye. Across the room, a young man near the counter was holding up his phone camera, aimed straight at them. The faint red light blinked. "You recording me?" Evan snapped. The guy didn't answer. He didn't need to. The live stream had already started minutes ago, capturing every word, every growl, every sneer. Comments were flooding in, little hearts and angry emojis flashing across the screen. "That's enough," Claire said sharply. "Police are on their way." Evan laughed, but the sound cracked. "Oh, they're gonna love this," he said, trying to regain control, but he could feel the shift, the quiet judgment, the eyes on him, the knowledge that his face was being broadcast to whoever was watching. For the first time, the swagger faltered. He took a step back, muttering something under his breath. Rex stayed locked, unmoving, a statue of control and warning. The air was electric heavy, with something that felt irreversible. David's heart pounded, though his expression stayed calm. "You should leave," Claire said quietly, one last offer of dignity. Evan's jaw clenched. His friends stood awkwardly by the door, unsure whether to follow or intervene. One of them muttered, "Come on, man, let's just go." But Evan didn't move. His pride wouldn't let him. His eyes flicked again to Rex, the dog standing firm, silent, unafraid. Something in that composure enraged him more than any insult could have. He took a half step forward, his hand twitching as if to reach toward the dog again, but Claire's voice stopped him cold. "Don't," she warned. The word wasn't loud, but it carried weight. It wasn't a plea, it was a command. And for a brief moment he hesitated. The cafe seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would happen next. The sound of sirens drew closer, before fading again, swallowed by distance. Evan and his friends had slipped out just before the patrol car arrived, leaving behind a room full of whispers and the lingering scent of aggression. The cafe slowly began to breathe again. Cups clinked. Conversations restarted, but quieter this time, as if everyone feared that raising their voice might stir the ghost of what had just happened. David sat still, his hand resting on Rex's back, feeling the slow return of calm beneath his palm. Rex's breathing steadied, though his gaze never left the door. "You did good," David whispered. His voice carried gratitude, but also something else, unease. Trouble like that didn't just walk away. It waited. Claire lingered near the counter, her phone pressed to her ear, as she gave her statement to the responding officers. When she finally hung up, she approached David's table. "You okay?" she asked softly. "Yeah," David said, forcing a small smile. "Thanks for stepping in." "Don't thank me," she said. "You don't need to. That guy was looking for a fight. You just happened to be the easiest target." David tilted his head. "You know dogs, don't you used to?" she said, her gaze dropping to Rex. "K-9 coordinator for 6 years. He's got training, doesn't he? The way he moves, the way he waits." "Yeah," David said quietly. "He's seen more than most people." Claire gave a small nod, then hesitated. "You should be careful," she said. "Men like that, they don't forget humiliation, especially not when there's an audience." David frowned slightly. "It's over now." Maybe she replied, but her tone said otherwise. She gave Rex a final glance before leaving the doorbell chiming softly behind her. The cafe fell back into its usual rhythm, but the air still felt heavy. Gina approached with a refill, her hands trembling slightly. "You sure you're okay?" "We're fine," David said, though the tension in his jaw said otherwise. "He's gone." Gina nodded, but didn't look convinced. Outside, the late afternoon sun had started to dip, washing the street in gold. David stood slowly, Rex rising beside him. The leash tightened between them, a small thread of shared awareness. As they stepped out, a few onlookers nodded in quiet solidarity. But in the back of the cafe, near the trash bins, Evan stood watching through the window. His jaw clenched, his knuckles white around his phone. He could still hear the low growl in his head, could still feel the shame of that moment when the crowd turned against him. He'd walked out laughing, pretending not to care, but every step had been heavier than the last. Outside, he lit a cigarette with shaking hands. His friends lingered nearby, uneasy. "Man, let it go," one said. "That dude's blind. You'll get yourself in more trouble." "You think I care?" Evan snapped. "You know how fast that video's spreading? Look at this." He thrust the phone toward them. The video was already climbing past 50,000 views. The title read, "Blind Man and His Service Dog Stand Up to Bully Biker." The comments were merciless. Words like coward and trash filled the screen. Evan scrolled, his face darkening. Then he froze. There, among the sea of usernames, one stood out, Melissa J. He clicked it. The profile opened to reveal photos he knew too well. His ex-girlfriend, the one who had filed a restraining order against him 2 years ago. The one whose jaw he'd fractured during an argument. The one who'd cost him his last job. The woman who had ruined him, or so he liked to tell himself. The bile rose in his throat. She'd shared the video. Her caption read, "Guess he hasn't changed much." "Unbelievable," Evan muttered, his voice shaking. "She's the one spreading this." His friend looked uneasy. "Evan, man, seriously, don't do anything stupid, he said, his tone turning cold. "She's laughing at me. They all are." He looked back through the cafe window where David had sat just minutes before. All because of him. "You picked the fight," the other man said, carefully. "No," Evan said, his voice rising. "He made me look weak. Him and that dog. You saw the way they looked at me like I was some kind of monster?" His friend didn't respond. Evan dropped the cigarette, crushing it under his boot. "I'm not letting this stand," he muttered. "I'm gonna fix it. How I just need to know where he lives," Evan said. "That's all." His friend hesitated. "You're out of your mind." Maybe Evan said, his lips curling into something between a grin and a snarl. "But I'm not done." A few hours later, Evan was back at the cafe alone. The dinner rush hadn't started yet, and the staff was busy restocking. He ordered a coffee he didn't drink and lingered near the counter until Gina came out from the back, tired but polite. Back again, she asked cautiously. "Yeah," Evan said, putting on his best easy smile. "Listen, about earlier, I wanted to apologize for causing a scene. I didn't mean for things to get out of hand." Gina's expression softened slightly. "Well, it's good you're saying that." "Yeah," he said. "I feel bad." "The guy, what's his name? The blind guy, David, right? David Ross." She said before realizing she shouldn't have. "Why just want to make it right?" Evan lied smoothly. "I was thinking maybe I could drop something off, say, sorry, in person. He probably doesn't want that," she said. "He's been through enough." "Of course," Evan said with practiced regret. "You're right. I didn't catch where he said he lived. I was hoping I could send something. A note or whatever." Gina hesitated. "He's just a few blocks east," she said, finally distracted, as another customer called for her attention. "The White House on Sycamore, near the corner." Evan's smile was sharp and brief. "Got it," he said quietly. When Gina turned back, he was gone. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, bathing the sidewalk in amber. Evan's boots clicked against the pavement as he walked to his bike. His reflection glinted in the chrome eyes, dark smile cold. He pulled out his phone again, staring at the still image from the video. David's calm face, Rex's unwavering stare. The internet might laugh now, but he'd make sure they saw something different soon. He pocketed the phone, started the engine, and drove off into the settling dusk, the roar of the motorcycle fading into the hum of evening traffic. Somewhere down Sycamore Street, a porch light flicked on, unaware of what was already coming its way. The rain started slow, like hesitant fingertips against glass, then grew steadier, washing the quiet street in a silver haze. The lamplight outside David's house flickered in the downpour, cutting through the dark like a trembling candle. Inside, the small living room was dim, except for the soft glow of a table lamp. David sat on the couch listening to the rain and the faint hum of an old jazz record spinning in the corner. Rex lay stretched out by the door, head resting on his paws, eyes half open, yet alert. It was peaceful in that fragile way nights can be, until the peace began to bend. A sound came first, almost too faint to notice, a shuffle, a faint scrape of a shoe against the wooden porch. Rex's ears twitched. The dog lifted his head slowly, nose pointing toward the front door. His body stiffened, and a low growl rolled from his chest like a warning whispered through thunder. David froze, his senses sharpening. "What is it?" he whispered. Rex didn't move. The growl deepened, quiet but deliberate. David turned off the record player, and silence flooded the room. He could hear the rain, the wind, and there, another sound. The creak of a step on the porch. His heartbeat quickened. The same instinct that had kept him alive as a cop now came alive again, a raw pulse beneath his calm exterior. He reached for his phone on the table, careful not to make noise. Then came the knock. 3 slow, deliberate thuds. Not the polite kind, but the kind that said, "I know you're in there." David's hand tightened on the phone. He didn't move, didn't speak. The knocking came again, harder this time. "Hey," a voice called out through the rain. Deep, rough, unmistakable. "You gonna open the door, Evan?" David felt the name like a knife through memory. Rex rose fully now, standing between the door and his owner. Hackles raised silent, but coiled. "I just want to talk," Evan said. His tone was mocking smooth with something dangerous under it. "You think you can embarrass me and get away with it?" David didn't answer. His thumb hovered over the phone screen, finding the emergency shortcut he'd programmed years ago. "Come on, man," Evan continued, his voice rising. "I saw your little video. Everyone did. You enjoying your 15 minutes?" Another knock. Louder, sharper. Rex growled, this time low and guttural, the sound vibrating through the air like a living alarm. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," David said finally, his voice steady. "You should leave." "Oh, you can talk," Evan laughed. "Didn't think you had the guts to open that mouth when you can't even see what's coming." David didn't reply. Instead, he quietly tapped the emergency call sequence. The operator answered almost immediately. 911, what's your emergency? "This is David Ross," he whispered. "There's someone outside my home. He's threatening me. I'm blind, but my dog's alert. Send a unit." The operator's tone shifted instantly. "Stay where you are, sir. Units are on the way. Do not open the door." David set the phone on speaker, keeping it close. Evan's footsteps thudded across the porch. "You know," he said, voice closer now, "I used to think these dogs were brave. But I see how it is. They only fight when someone tells them to. Without orders, they're useless." He rapped on the door again. "That right, boy, you useless now," Rex barked once, a sharp, commanding sound that sliced through the rain. Evan flinched, the noise too close, too powerful. He cursed under his breath, but there was an edge of uncertainty now. Inside, David moved silently toward the hallway, hand brushing the wall for orientation. He knew the layout by heart. One step to the left led to the kitchen. 2 more to the hallway phone charger. Rex tracked every move, eyes locked on the door. "You're making a mistake," David called out. "You don't want to do this." Evan laughed again, but it was a thin, shaky sound now. "You think the cops care about you? You think anyone's gonna come save a washed-up blind cop and his mutt?" He paused, the words hanging there in the dark. "I just want to talk, man. Open up." "No," David said quietly. "You're done talking." There was a beat of silence, then a loud bang, something heavy hitting the door. Rex barked again, the sound echoing off the walls. David backed up, keeping his voice calm. "Help is on the way," he told the operator. "He's trying to break in." The dispatcher's voice came steady through the phone. "Officers are en route. Stay where you are." Outside, Evan muttered something too low to hear. Then came footsteps, quick and retreating, splashing down the porch steps. The motorcycle engine roared to life, seconds later fading into the rain-soaked night. Rex stayed tense for a full minute before his tail lowered slightly. David exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "You did good," he whispered. But the unease lingered. Something about the way Evan had spoken, controlled but unstable, told David this wasn't finished. 10 minutes later, flashing blue and red lights painted the street outside. The door creaked as officers stepped in their boots, leaving wet prints on the floor. "Mr. Ross," one called. "You okay, yeah?" David said. "He's gone." But he was here. The officer crouched to examine the porch. "Looks like fresh footprints," he said. "He didn't stay long." Another officer took photos. The sound of the shutter clicked like small explosions in the quiet. "You sure it was the same guy from the cafe?" "I'm sure," David said. "I'd know that voice anywhere." The first officer nodded. "We'll run the prints," he said. "See if anything matches." A few minutes later, he returned, his voice lower now. "Mr. Ross, you might want to hear this. We've got a preliminary match on those prints. They're consistent with a suspect from an aggravated assault last month. Guy's got a record for violence." David stood still, his hand resting on Rex's back. "Name Evan Pierce," the officer said. The name hung heavy in the air. Outside, the rain had slowed to a whisper, but the sound of thunder still rolled far off in the distance, promising more to come. The following morning came gray and heavy with mist. The storm had passed, but the air felt thick, as if the night had left behind something more than rain. David sat at his kitchen table, fingers wrapped around a mug he hadn't touched. The coffee had long gone cold, but he didn't notice. Rex lay near his feet, ears pricked toward every sound, muscles still tense from the night before. Every now and then he'd raise his head, sniffing the air, as if expecting the man's voice to return. The knock that came at the door this time was softer, familiar. "Mr. Ross." It was Officer Daniels, the same one who had taken his statement last night. David stood hand-brushing along the table edge to find his cane. Rex rose with him, always one step ahead. "Come in," David said. The officer entered, shaking the water from his jacket. "Sorry to drop by early," Daniels began. "We've been reviewing last night's report. Something interesting came up." David frowned. "About the footprints?" "Yeah," Daniels said slowly. "We sent them for comparison. The initial match came back this morning, and one of our analysts flagged a note from an old case file. A file connected to your name." David's grip tightened on his cane. "What case the explosion?" Daniels said. "The warehouse incident. 3 years ago." For a moment the world went still. The faint hum of the refrigerator, the distant bark of a neighbor's dog, all of it faded. "That case was closed," David said quietly. "They said it was faulty wiring." "That's what the final report said," Daniels replied. "But apparently there were inconsistencies. The shoe print we found last night matches one recovered from the debris site back then. It's an old brand Thornton Ridge size 11. Not common." David turned his head toward the sound of rain still dripping from the eaves. "You're telling me the same man who tried to break into my house was there the night I lost my sight?" "We don't know that for sure," Daniels said carefully. "But it's possible. I've asked the department to reopen the evidence file. There's also someone I want to loop in." Hours later, at the precinct, fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead as Claire Donovan stepped through the doorway, a file folder tucked under her arm. Her hair was pulled back neatly, but there was exhaustion in her eyes, the kind that comes from digging into old wounds. "Thanks for coming in," Daniels said. "Didn't expect to see you again so soon." She replied, shaking his hand. "After last night, I figured things weren't done." "They're not," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "You coordinated the K-9 division back when Ross was active, right?" "That's right," Claire said. "I handled some of his unit's logistics, including the response to the warehouse explosion." Daniels opened a digital case file on the screen and pulled up the latest photos. "Look at this," he said, pointing at the side-by-side comparison. One photo showed a muddy footprint outside David's porch. The other, faded and grainy, came from an evidence photo taken years earlier in a dark, soot-stained warehouse. Claire leaned forward. Even through the distortion, the pattern was unmistakable. "That's the same sole," she murmured. "Same wear line across the heel." "Exactly," Daniels said. "Back then it was logged, but never matched to anyone. The site was a mess. Half the evidence was damaged by the fire. But this..." He tapped the screen. "This gives us a thread." Claire sat back, exhaling slowly. "That explosion wasn't an accident. I told them that years ago. The accelerant patterns, the ignition points, it didn't look like faulty wiring to me. It looked like deliberate placement." Daniels nodded. "You think this Evan Pierce was involved? If those prints are his," she said, "he wasn't just there. He might have caused it." Meanwhile, in a quiet interrogation room, David sat across from a younger detective taking notes. He could sense Claire's presence before she spoke. "David," she said softly. "It's Claire." He smiled faintly. Didn't expect to hear that voice again. "You remember the night of the blast?" she asked gently. "Bits and pieces," he said. "Mostly the sound. The smell. We were called in on a tip about stolen weapons. The place went up before we could secure it. You were one of 2 survivors," she said quietly. "Your partner didn't make it." "I know," David said. "I still hear him sometimes." There was a long pause before she continued. "There's something you should know. The man from last night, Evan Pierce, his prints match a partial set from the scene." David's lips parted slightly, his expression unreadable. "You're sure we're still confirming?" She said, "But the match looks solid. And there's more." She laid a photograph on the table, an old, grainy still from a surveillance camera. This was recovered from a backup drive a few days after the explosion. It was dismissed at the time because of poor quality. But look. She guided his hand to the edge of the photo where a blurred figure moved across the frame, shoulders hunched, wearing a dark jacket. "That's someone leaving through the back exit about 40 seconds before detonation. And you think it's him?" "We ran a frame enhancement this morning," Claire said. "It's not perfect, but the build, the gate, the outline, it's consistent with Pierce's records from his employment file." "Employment, he worked at that warehouse." Daniels interjected. "Hired as temporary labor 2 weeks before the explosion. He disappeared right after. No forwarding address, no termination record. Just gone." David leaned back, processing. So the man who tried to break into my house might have been part of the same explosion that took my sight. It's looking that way, Claire said. If that's true, then last night wasn't random. The room fell silent for a moment. Outside rain hit the windows like fingers tapping glass. Why come after me now? David asked. Why wait 3 years? Maybe because he saw that video, Daniel said. And maybe he recognized you before you recognized him. Claire's eyes lingered on David. You said he spoke to you at the door, she said. Did he mention anything about the past? No, David said quietly. But his tone, it felt personal, like unfinished business. Claire nodded. Then it's personal. Daniels gathered the files. We'll dig deeper. Maybe the warehouse owner kept employment records. Maybe there's another witness. Be careful, David said. This man isn't just angry. He's smart enough to hide. Claire looked at him, her voice steady, but laced with something like guilt. We should have found him back then. Maybe you wouldn't have lost, don't, David said gently. That night's over. Just tell me how to help now. You already did, she said. You survived. Daniels turned to leave, phone buzzing in his pocket. We'll keep you posted, he said, stepping into the hallway. Claire lingered a moment longer. Rex stood near the doorway, eyes fixed on her, calm but alert. He remembers me, she murmured. He remembers everything David said. Outside the precinct, a gust of wind carried the smell of wet asphalt. Somewhere in the distance, thunder murmured again, a low promise that the storm wasn't done. The nights in Fairgrove had grown colder, sharper, as if the air itself was holding its breath. The rain had stopped, but puddles still clung to the sidewalks, reflecting the flicker of streetlights like fractured glass. Inside his home, David sat on the couch with the television on low volume, not watching, just listening to the rhythm of human voices, something to break the silence. Rex lay by the front window, his head resting between his paws, eyes open and fixed on nothing that David could see. The dog had been restless for days, pacing between doors, sniffing corners, whining at shadows. It wasn't like him. He was trained to be calm, steady, methodical. But lately he was something else, uneasy, alert, waiting. David had noticed the change, though he tried not to let his mind go where it wanted to. The officers had increased patrols, but no one had seen Evan since the night of the attempted break-in. Officially, the case was under investigation. Unofficially, David knew better. Men like Evan didn't disappear. They watched. They waited. And they returned when you least expected it. The wind brushed the side of the house, creaking through the gutters. Somewhere outside, a car door shut quietly. Rex lifted his head instantly. David froze, straining to listen. Then came the sound, a faint crunch of gravel underfoot, soft, but deliberate. Rex, David whispered. The dog's posture changed, body tensing, ears perked. The low growl that followed vibrated through the air like a warning before a storm. David stood his hand brushing the wall as he moved to the door. He stopped just short of it, tilting his head toward the sound. The footsteps came closer, slow and measured, circling the porch. He reached for his phone, ready to call 911 again, but then the sound stopped. Only the silence of the night remained. Rex's growl didn't fade. His nose lifted, nostrils flaring. His tail stiffened not from fear, but from recognition. A scent lingered in the air, faint but distinct, the bitter metallic tang of gunpowder mixed with oil and rain. It wasn't the smell of a weapon fired, but of one carried oiled and ready. Rex knew that scent. It was the same smell that had filled the air the night of the explosion, the same one he'd never forgotten. He let out a soft whine, moving toward the door, as if to block it with his body. David crouched beside him. What is it? He whispered. His hand brushed Rex's fur, feeling the tremor beneath the muscle. You smell something, don't you? The dog didn't respond, only shifted his stance, eyes trained on the window. David stood locking the door and checking the latch twice. He didn't sleep that night. Neither did Rex. By morning, the ground outside the porch showed faint impressions in the dirt boot prints half-washed by dew. David couldn't see them, but when Officer Daniels came by later, he didn't need to. Someone's been around, Daniels confirmed. No sign of forced entry, but those tracks are fresh, Evan David said quietly. Has to be. We're looking into it, Daniels said. But if he's back, he's being careful. David's voice was calm, but his jaw tightened. He's not careful. He's obsessed. Across town in a run-down garage at the edge of an industrial lot, Evan Pierce sat hunched over a table littered with cigarette butts and beer cans. The video from the cafe played again on his phone, muted this time. He watched himself sneer, then flinch when the dog growled. Every replay made his skin crawl. "You need to let it go," a voice said behind him. It belonged to a man in his 40s, lean with a jagged scar across his neck. His name was Kyle, a former demolition worker with a record longer than his arm. "You don't get it," Evan muttered. "He ruined me. Everyone saw that video. You think I can just walk around pretending it didn't happen?" Kyle shrugged. "You're the one who made a fool of yourself, not him." "You weren't there," Evan snapped. "You didn't see that dog's eyes. It's like he knew me, like he remembered." A second man laughed from the corner. "Maybe he did. You were working the same warehouse when it blew, weren't you?" Evan glared at him. "That was a job. We were told to clear it. We didn't know it was going to blow. Doesn't matter," Kyle said, lighting another cigarette. "That cop lost his sight. The department buried the case, but now they're digging again. That's on you." Evan slammed his fist on the table. "It's on all of us. You think they won't find out? You think they won't trace it back?" Kyle blew smoke toward the ceiling. "Then maybe you should finish what you started." The words hung heavy in the air. Evan looked up, his face pale but determined. "I just wanted to scare him," he said quietly. "Now I want him gone." "You mean the cop or the dog?" the other man asked. "Both," Evan said. He leaned forward, voice low. "That warehouse fire, they were supposed to destroy the evidence. All the weapons, the ledgers. But he showed up early, brought his K9. We got out before it blew, but someone saw me." Now that dog's staring at me again. It's like fate's laughing in my face. "So what's the plan?" Kyle asked. Evan opened a small duffel bag and pulled out a pistol, wrapping it in a cloth. "We watch," he said. "We wait for the right night, and then we make sure no one ever connects us to that fire again." The other man said, uneasy. "I didn't sign up for—" "You already did," Evan cut in. "You were there that night, remember? You light it. You own it." The garage fell silent except for the hum of rain gutters dripping outside. Back on Sycamore Street, David sat by the window, phone in hand, speaking with Claire. "They're reopening the case," she said. "We found employment records linking Pierce to the warehouse. He wasn't just there. He was listed as a temporary safety technician." "You're saying he had access to the fuel system," David said. "Exactly," Claire replied. "If he tampered with it, that explosion wasn't an accident, it was insurance fraud or worse. But whoever paid him wanted the place erased. Maybe he's afraid you'll expose that now." "I can't expose what I can't see." David said, a bitter smile touching his lips. "You can still remember," Claire said. "And maybe that's what he's afraid of." Outside, the wind picked up again, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and oil. Rex's head turned toward the window, nose twitching. A low rumble escaped his throat. David reached out his hand, brushing the leash that hung by the door. "You smell it again, don't you?" he whispered. The air tasted faintly metallic, acrid, the ghost of gunpowder lingering on the breeze. Somewhere beyond the streetlight's edge, a figure shifted in the dark. Evan stood across the road, motionless cigarette glowing between his fingers, watching the silhouette of the house. Two others lingered behind him, shadows blending with the night. He took one last drag, exhaled, and said quietly, "Tomorrow night." The night arrived cold and windless, the kind of stillness that feels like the world is holding its breath before something breaks. The moon hung half-hidden behind clouds, casting the quiet street in a faint silver hue. David had been uneasy all evening. He couldn't explain why. Maybe it was the weight of the silence outside, or the way Rex had been pacing since sunset, moving from window to door, like a sentinel waiting for orders that hadn't come. The phone lay on the coffee table, volume turned up, emergency line programmed and ready. He'd rehearsed in his mind what he'd do if Evan came back. He didn't realize how soon that plan would be tested. Somewhere beyond the house, a faint sound echoed metal, scraping wood, slow and deliberate. Rex's head shot up. His growl came instantly low and guttural. David froze, heart pounding. "What is it?" he whispered, but he already knew the answer. The sound came again, closer now. The back door. A hinge creaked under pressure. Then, the unmistakable crack of wood splitting. Someone was forcing their way in. David reached down, gripping Rex's collar. "Stay with me," he murmured. But Rex pulled forward slightly, body-tense ears pointed towards the kitchen. David could hear the faint shuffle of boots inside, a voice muttering low. Evan's voice. "Keep quiet," David whispered, feeling for the wall moving toward the hallway. Rex stayed close, not barking, not charging his training, overriding instinct. Another voice joined Evan's, rougher, deeper. "You sure he's here?" "Yeah," Evan hissed. "Lights are off, cars still out front, he's here. And the dog? We'll handle it." David's hand brushed the edge of the hallway cabinet, his pulse racing. He crouched beside Rex. "Listen to me," he whispered. "We can't fight them head on." He reached behind the cabinet fingers, finding a small latch hidden beneath the molding. A soft click broke the silence. The back panel of the wall shifted, revealing a narrow passage that led into a small crawl space, a feature David had built himself years ago, an old cop's habit of never trusting a single exit. In he whispered. Rex nudged his arm but didn't move. The dog's body was angled toward the kitchen, ready but restrained. Rex David urged, voice shaking, "Go." But the shepherd refused. He turned his head toward the sound, instead eyes locked. The intruders had made it into the kitchen. Boots scuffed the tile. "You take the back hall," Evan ordered quietly. "I'll check the living room. What about the dog? If it moves, shoot it." David's breath caught. He tightened his grip on the phone, hands trembling, and hit the emergency call shortcut. The line clicked open. 911, what's your emergency? Came a calm female voice. "This is David Ross," he whispered. "2 armed men in my house. They've broken in." "Sir, stay on the line," the operator said quickly. "Officers are being dispatched. Can you secure yourself?" "Trying," he whispered. "They're inside. Please hurry. Stay quiet. What's your location?" "Sycamore Street. House number 42. A pause. Then a familiar tone in the woman's voice. "David, it's Claire. I'm on dispatch tonight. I've got you." Relief flickered through the panic. "Claire," he breathed. "They're in the kitchen. 2, maybe 3. I heard one say shoot the dog." "Understood," she said, her voice firm and steady. "Units are en route. Get somewhere safe. Don't engage." "I can't leave him," David said. "He's holding position." Claire hesitated. "Then trust him. He knows what to do." From the kitchen came another sound, a low, sinister chuckle. "You hiding," Ross Evans' voice echoed down the hall. Not very brave for a cop. The footsteps crept closer, floorboards creaking under weight. David reached out, touching Rex's head gently. Now he whispered. Rex moved forward silently, positioning himself between the living room and the hallway, a dark shape barely visible in the faint glow from the streetlight outside. His tail was low, his breathing steady. David slipped into the narrow passage, closing the panel behind him, but leaving a small gap open. Through that sliver, he could hear everything. "You see him?" one of the men whispered. "Not yet," Evan muttered. "Dog's probably hiding too." "I don't like this," the other man said. "Let's just grab what we came for and go. We came to finish it," Evan snapped. "That dog saw me at the warehouse. I'm not letting it happen again." His boots clicked against the floor as he stepped into the living room. Rex didn't move until Evan crossed the threshold. Then, in one fluid motion, the dog launched forward, not to attack, but to block. He hit the ground in front of Evan, barking once loud enough to shake the windows. Evan stumbled back, startled. The other man raised his weapon. "Shoot it!" he shouted. The shot never came. Rex lunged sideways, slamming into the man's arm with precision. The gun clattered to the floor, discharging harmlessly into the wall. David, hidden behind the panel, clenched his fists, forcing himself to stay quiet. The phone buzzed softly in his ear. Claire's voice steady over the chaos. "David, what's happening?" "He's here," David whispered. Rex engaged one of them. "Units are minutes out," she said quickly. "Just stay hidden." Evan cursed, stumbling toward the door. "Get the gun," he yelled, but Rex was faster. He darted between them, knocking over a chair, his growl filling the room like thunder. David could hear every sound, boots scuffling furniture, scraping, the sharp exhale of a man losing his nerve. "Forget it," the second man shouted. "This isn't worth it." Evan's voice came back, breathless, furious. "Go to the back, block the dog." The sound of retreating footsteps echoed through the hall. David pushed open this panel a few inches, whispering, "Rex, come." But the shepherd didn't. He stayed where he was, guarding the doorway. David could almost feel his heartbeat echo through the floorboards. Claire's voice broke through again. "David, stay down. They're almost there. Can you hear sirens?" He listened. Faintly in the distance, the wail of approaching sirens bled through the rain-soaked air. But so did something else, a door slamming open, a final shout. Rex David called softly, desperation slipping through his control. The dog barked once in response. Then there was the crash of glass, a grunt of pain and silence. The crash of breaking glass echoed through the small house like thunder in a canyon. David's pulse pounded in his ears as he crouched behind the half-open panel, the phone still in his hand. Claire's voice a faint whisper through the speaker. "David, what's happening? Do you copy?" But David couldn't speak. His breath caught in his throat as the sounds of struggle filled the room, the scuffle of boots, a snarl, a sharp cry of pain, then silence. It lasted too long, heavy and suffocating. His fingers tightened around the phone. "Rex," he whispered, barely audible. A single bark answered from the living room, short, sharp, alive. Relief hit him like air after drowning. Then came the sound of the back door slamming. Heavy footsteps pounded across the floor, then retreated fast, fading toward the yard. Another voice shouted, "He's bleeding, let's go!" Tires screeched outside. David pushed the panel open and stumbled into the living room, guided by instinct and the faint metallic smell that hit him instantly blood. The air was thick with it, mixed with gunpowder and broken glass. He crouched down, his hand brushing against something warm on the hardwood. "Rex," he said urgently. The dog limped toward him, panting, his fur streaked with a shallow cut across his flank. "Easy, boy, easy." Rex pressed his head against David's knee, trembling, but alert ears still trained on the back door. "They're gone," David murmured more to himself than to the dog. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. The red and blue lights flared through the rain-streaked windows, seconds later, painting the walls in flickering color. Officers stormed through the door, weapons drawn, voices shouting commands. "Police, is anyone injured?" "We're here," David called out, holding Rex close. They broke in. "One's hurt." He ran out the back. Officer Daniels appeared beside him, breathless. "Are you okay?" "We're fine," David said, though his voice was unsteady. They left blood on the floor. Daniels signaled to another officer. "Bag it. Get samples." Then to David. "Did you see them?" "No," David said. "But I heard 3. One called the other Evan. He's bleeding bad." Daniels nodded. "We'll set up checkpoints. They won't get far." Claire's voice came over the officer's radio. "Unit 3 suspect vehicle headed north on Pine. Silver pickup, 2 occupants, possibly armed." Daniels grabbed the mic. "Copy that? Pursue but maintain distance." The next few hours blurred together. The house filled with movement officers photographing evidence medics, tending to Rex's cut radios crackling with updates. Through it all, David sat quietly on the couch, one hand resting on Rex's fur, grounding himself. When Claire finally arrived in person, rain still dripping from her coat, she knelt beside him. "You all right? We're breathing," he said softly. "That's something." "You did everything right," she said. "So did he." She looked at Rex, who lifted his head, eyes weary but alert. "He bought you time. He always does." Daniels approached, holding a sealed evidence bag. Inside, streaks of dark red stood out against the clear plastic. "We got enough blood for DNA," he said. "We'll run it through the system tonight," Good Claire said. "We need confirmation." David tilted his head slightly. "You think it's him, don't you? The same man from the warehouse." "I think it's worse than that," she said quietly. "He wasn't just there. He might have been part of it from the beginning." Hours later, the call came through. Daniels found David still awake, sitting by the window as the first light of dawn crept into the room. "You should hear this," Daniels said, his tone heavy. "The lab rushed the DNA results. The blood from your floor is a match to Evan Pierce. Not a surprise, David said evenly. That's not all, Daniels continued. It also matches trace evidence recovered from the warehouse debris 3 years ago, blood found near the ignition source. David froze. So he was there. Yes, Daniels said. He wasn't just there. The report logs show 3 unidentified individuals on site before the explosion. His DNA confirms he was one of them. The air in the room seemed to tighten. David's hand clenched around the armrest. And the others still unknown. But one of them could be the second man you heard last night. So he came back to erase what was left, David said quietly, to make sure no one ever tied him to that fire. Daniels nodded grimly. It's looking that way. Claire entered then, holding her phone. We've got eyes on his truck, she said. He's heading north toward the state line. 2 units in pursuit, but there's a storm rolling in. Visibility's bad. David stood steadying himself with the cane. They won't catch him if he knows the back roads. Claire glanced at him. You think you know where he's going? He's predictable, David said. He'll try to cut through the ridge road, it's the fastest way out. But he doesn't know they've repaired that bridge. There's only one route open now. We can't risk losing him, Daniels said, grabbing his radio. But before he could speak, Rex lifted his head sharply, ears twitching. A faint sound filled the room, the distant rise and fall of a siren. To anyone else, it would have been indistinguishable amid the storm. But Rex recognized it instantly. He barked once, then again, each bark timed perfectly to the siren's sequence. Claire frowned. What's he doing? David's expression changed. He's signaling, he said. That's a pursuit tone Unit 3. He knows the sound pattern. He's tracking them by sound, Daniels asked, incredulous. David nodded. He trained for it. Back when he was K9, we used sound cues for communication. He can tell which unit's closing in. Claire grabbed her radio. Unit 3 confirmed siren pattern. The officer's voice crackled through. Confirmed. We're behind the suspect vehicle, now approaching mile marker 14. He's got nowhere to go, David said. The ridge road ends at a closed quarry. If they push him there, it's over. Static filled the air for a few tense seconds, then a burst of chatter came through. Suspect vehicle has crashed. Repeat, suspect vehicle down in the quarry ditch. Requesting medics. Daniels exhaled, lowering the radio. They got him. Claire didn't move right away. She looked at David, at the calm resignation in his face. You knew it would end like this, didn't you? He didn't answer. Instead, he reached down and touched Rex's head, feeling the dog's steady heartbeat against his palm. He always knows before I do, David said softly. He hears things I can't. Claire nodded. They're bringing him in now. We'll confirm everything once he's processed. David turned towards the sound of rain hitting the windows again, his voice low. He thought he could erase the past, he said. But the past always leaves something behind, blood truth or a bark in the dark. The next morning broke soft and golden, as if the sky itself wanted to apologize for the storm that had raged the night before. The rain had washed the streets clean, leaving the air fresh with the scent of damp earth and coffee drifting from the little cafe on the corner of Sycamore Street. Life had returned to normal, at least as normal as a quiet town could be. After the night, it almost lost one of its own. Inside that cafe, David Ross sat at his usual corner table facing the window, where sunlight poured in through the glass. The world beyond it was a blur of distant sounds, footsteps, laughter, the hiss of the espresso machine, all blending into a calm rhythm he knew by heart. Beside him sat Rex, the German shepherd lying close with his head upright, eyes scanning every face, every movement outside, as if the night had taught him that peace was something to guard. Gina, the waitress, approached softly, her voice warm but careful. Back already, huh? She said. David smiled faintly, his fingers brushing the edge of the coffee cup she placed before him. Habit's hard to break. After what happened, I figured you'd avoid this place for a while, she admitted. Most folks would, maybe David said. But I'm not most folks. Rex nudged his knee gently as if agreeing. Gina laughed, then lowered her voice. They're saying your dog's a hero. You've seen the news, I don't see much these days, David said dryly. But Gina didn't miss the hint of humor behind the words. You mean you haven't heard she pressed? That video of him saving you. Someone filmed the whole thing from across the street. It's gone viral. National news picked it up this morning. David tilted his head, slightly surprised, flickering across his face. The video from last night? Yeah, it's everywhere. They're calling him the dog who never forgot his duty. She paused, her voice softening. The police reopened the warehouse case because of it. The footage drew attention to the investigation. Apparently, a few officers who were suspended years ago over the explosion, they're being cleared. It's a big deal. David went still. The weight of that sentence lingered. For 3 years, the warehouse explosion had been a ghost hanging over his life, a moment that stole his sight and buried the truth. Now, somehow, that truth was clawing its way back to the surface because of a video he hadn't even known existed. Guess he's still working the force in his own way, he murmured, resting his hand on Rex's back. You both are, Gina said. People need stories like this. Outside cars rolled by slowly, a few honking in recognition. The cafe door opened and closed again and again as strangers came in ordering coffee just to glance at the man and his dog by the window. Some whispered, some smiled. A child approached, shyly clutching his mother's hand. Mom, that's the hero dog. The mother hushed him gently, but smiled at David. He is, David said softly. And he knows it too. The boy giggled as Rex lowered his head for a quick pat before settling back down. Claire arrived a few minutes later, her badge still clipped to her belt, a faint exhaustion in her eyes, but a calmness too, the kind that comes after something has finally made sense. You made it, she said, pulling up a chair. Wouldn't miss it, David said. You look like someone who hasn't slept. Barely an hour, she admitted. We processed Evan Pierce this morning. He's in custody awaiting charges. His confession matches everything. He admitted the warehouse job was arson for insurance money. The 2 men with him, one's dead, the other's in custody. It's over, David. Over. He repeated quietly, the word tasting strange on his tongue. You can finally let it rest, Claire said. You got justice. David shook his head slightly. Justice isn't what I wanted, he said. I just wanted to know why. And now you do, she said. Sometimes that's enough. They sat in silence for a moment, the sound of coffee cups and soft jazz filling the space between words. Then Claire said, They're talking about giving Rex a service medal. The department wants to honor him officially, maybe even reinstate his record. He deserves it. He doesn't care about medals, David said with a small smile. He just wants to make sure I don't bump into tables. Claire laughed quietly. Still, you should be proud. I am, he said simply. Outside, the morning sun caught the gleam of Rex's collar, turning the metal tag into a tiny burst of light. A few reporters stood across the street, cameras slung at their sides, waiting for the chance to ask a question. Claire noticed them first. Looks like you've got fans, she said. Wonderful, David muttered, shaking his head. Never thought I'd be a headline. You're more than that, Claire said gently. You're proof that what's broken can still protect what's whole. One of the reporters finally approached, polite but eager. Mr. Ross, can we ask a quick question for the paper? Sure, David said, setting his cup down. Go ahead. You've been through a lot, the reporter began. After everything that happened here and before at the warehouse, how does it feel to sit here again? In the same place where it all started, David paused. The cafe buzzed softly around him, the smell of coffee and rain blending into something almost comforting. Rex stirred at his feet, then rested his head on David's shoe, calm grounded. Do I feel afraid? David said slowly. The reporter nodded. David smiled, small, but genuine. No, he said, because he sees for both of us now. The cafe went quiet for a heartbeat, the words settling like dust in sunlight. The reporter lowered his camera, slightly unsure how to respond. David reached down, fingers brushing the soft fur along Rex's neck. You know, he said softly, almost to himself, people think losing your sight means you stop seeing. But I've seen more in darkness than I ever did in light. Fear, loyalty, courage. All of it's clearer now. Because when you stop depending on what's in front of your eyes, you start trusting what's beside you. Claire smiled faintly, looking at him with something like admiration. Maybe that's what it means to see, she said. Not with your eyes, but with what's left when everything else fades. David tilted his head towards the window. The morning sounds the same as it always did, he murmured. But somehow it feels different. Outside, a breeze stirred the trees, scattering raindrops from the leaves. The same cafe, the same table, and the same man and dog, yet nothing was the same. Life had looped back to where it began, quieter, but truer, as if the universe itself had exhaled. Rex looked up briefly, tail wagging once, then rested again, satisfied. David lifted his cup, smiling to no one in particular. To seeing, he said softly. In our own way, if this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe and share it with someone who still believes in loyalty and second chances. Which moment moved you the most, the night Rex stood his ground, or the morning David found peace again? Tell me in the comments and let me know where in the world you're watching from. Your story might just begin here too.